They invited her as the punchline. They invited him as the setup. A CEO who built a $1 billion company from nothing. A single father whose hands were rougher than the concrete he poured every morning. Around that dinner table sat people who wanted front row seats to a disaster. The quiet smirks, the loaded glances, the kind of cruelty that wears a dinner jacket and calls itself entertainment. What none of them expected was that the two people they meant to humiliate would end up being the only real ones in the room. This is their story. Stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this has traveled. The invitation came on a Tuesday. Ethan Carter almost didn't open it. It had been sitting on his kitchen counter for 3 days, buried under a permission slip from his son's school, 2 unopened utility bills, and a crayon drawing of what he believed was supposed to be a dinosaur, but could also have been a very ambitious dog. His life existed in layers like that, things stacking on top of other things, nothing ever quite getting handled the way it should, everything held together by habit and stubbornness and the particular brand of exhaustion that doesn't show up on anyone's face until you really look. He was 32 years old, and he looked it. Not in a bad way exactly, just in an honest way. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. His jaw carried a few days of stubble because shaving had become the kind of luxury that got bumped from the morning schedule whenever Marcus woke up with a nightmare or a stomachache or just one of those moods that 6-year-olds get where nothing is wrong and everything is wrong at the same time. Carter Construction had grown faster than he'd planned for. 31 employees now, 3 active commercial projects, a reputation in the city that he'd built one poured foundation at a time, one delivered deadline at a time, one phone call returned on a Sunday morning when his competitors let it go to voicemail. The company was doing well. Ethan himself was doing fine. That word again. Fine. He finally opened the invitation on a Thursday evening while Marcus was in the bath, splashing water onto the tile floor with the kind of deliberate energy that only children apply to the exact things they're not supposed to do. Dinner at Rosewood. Saturday, 7 p.m. Don't be late. Dress like you own something. James Harlow had been his friend since they were 19 and working the same summer construction crew, sweating through identical gray t-shirts and eating lunch on the tailgate of a borrowed truck. James was one of those people who'd softened with success. Nicer apartment, nicer car, a certain comfort with rooms that Ethan still felt slightly foreign in. But he was loyal in his way. They had history. Ethan didn't have so many people left that he could afford to ignore the ones who stayed. He texted back, "What kind of dinner?" James replied 30 seconds later with, "The fun kind. Come on, you haven't been out since the Johnson project wrapped. You're turning into a wall." Ethan looked at the message. He looked at the bathroom door, behind which Marcus had now progressed from splashing to what sounded like active naval warfare. He typed back, "Fine, but I'm leaving by 9. He found a sitter through the same agency he always used, a retired schoolteacher named Donna, who Marcus adored because she let him stay up 20 minutes past his bedtime and always brought a new puzzle. Donna arrived at 6:15 on Saturday, settled herself into the living room armchair with the quiet confidence of someone who had been managing other people's children for 40 years, and told Ethan he looked nice. He was wearing dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His one good jacket was draped over his arm. He wasn't sure if it still fit right across the shoulders. He'd put on some muscle in the last 2 years, working sites alongside his crew, more than a company owner probably needed to, but he'd always found the physical work easier than sitting still. "I'll be back by 9:30, he told Donna. "Take your time," she said, not looking up from the puzzle she was already opening. Marcus ran to him at the door, arms up, the universal signal. Ethan crouched and held him for a moment, pressing his nose into the boy's hair, that clean kid smell, shampoo and something indefinably warm. Marcus pulled back and studied his father's face with the serious expression he sometimes got, like he was trying to read something written in very small print. "Are you going somewhere fun?" Marcus asked. "Probably not," Ethan said honestly. Marcus nodded, apparently satisfied with that answer, and ran back to Donna and the puzzle. PM. Rosewood was the kind of restaurant that had a waiting list and a wine menu the size of a short novel. Ethan had been there once before, for a client dinner, and had spent most of it quietly calculating whether he was holding the right fork. He pulled up in his truck, a clean but clearly working truck, not the kind people drove to restaurants like this unless they were making a statement, and handed the keys to a valet who kept his expression professionally neutral. The private dining room was already half full when he arrived. He recognized most of the faces. James and his wife, Claire, who greeted him with the slightly too warm hug of someone who felt guilty about something. Derek and Stephanie Walsh, who ran in social circles that Ethan generally found exhausting. A couple he didn't know. Software money, from the look of them. The particular ease of people whose work existed entirely in the digital world, and who had never once had to explain to a client why the concrete delivery was delayed. And then 3 people he'd never seen before. A woman he was introduced to as Pamela, who worked in PR. A man named Garrett with a firm handshake and the smile of someone who was always performing, and an empty chair. James clapped him on the shoulder. "Glad you made it. Drink?" "Water first," Ethan said. "Who's the empty chair?" James's smile went 1 degree too wide. "Just a friend. She's running a little late." "She." Ethan looked at the table arrangement. The empty chair was placed directly across from where he was apparently meant to sit. He looked back at James. "What did you do?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Nothing," James said with the voice of a man who had done something. "It's just dinner. Relax." She arrived 18 minutes late, which she would later tell him she'd done intentionally, not out of rudeness, but because arriving precisely on time to an event you hadn't fully agreed to felt like surrendering before the first move. He heard the room shift before he saw her. Not dramatically. Not the movie version where everyone turns in slow motion and the music swells. It was subtler than that, just a slight recalibration of attention, the way a room adjusts when someone with a certain quality of presence enters it. Victoria Sinclair was 30 years old and carried herself the way people do when they've spent years in rooms where underestimating them was the default and proving those rooms wrong became a reflex. She was in a deep navy dress, structured, understated, the kind of clothing that communicated competence rather than effort. Dark hair pulled back, small gold earrings. She looked like she had better things to do and had decided to be gracious about it. She scanned the room once, quick, efficient, and Ethan saw the exact moment she understood what this dinner was. Her expression didn't change. That was the tell. People who've been ambushed before learn to keep their face still. James made the introductions with the particular enthusiasm of someone lighting a fuse. "Victoria, this is everyone. And this specifically is Ethan Carter. Ethan owns Carter Construction. Victoria is the founder and CEO of Sinclair Group." "I know what the Sinclair Group is," Ethan said, standing and offering his hand. She shook it. Her grip was direct, no performance. "And I've seen the Carter Construction signage on the Meridian development on 5th, she said. "Good work on that facade." He hadn't expected that. "You noticed the facade?" "I notice buildings," she said simply, and took her seat. The dinner unraveled in the way these things do. Gradually, and then all at once. It started with small things. Garrett, across the table, made a comment about juggling priorities that was aimed at Victoria in a way that had a point to it. The kind of comment that sounds neutral until you hear the edge beneath it. Stephanie Walsh asked Victoria, with exaggerated sympathy, whether it was really possible to run a company of that size while also being a mother, the question wrapped in concern like a gift that's actually a critique. Victoria answered each one cleanly, without flinching. She'd clearly fielded versions of these before, but Ethan was watching her hands, not her face. She held her wine glass by the stem, and her grip tightened slightly each time, just barely, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. Then Derek Walsh, who'd had 2.5 drinks and apparently decided the evening needed livening up, leaned back in his chair and looked between Ethan and Victoria with the grin of a man about to say something he thought was clever. "You two actually have a lot in common," Derek said. "Both of you are, what, single parents? Carrying a lot of extra weight into something new?" He chuckled. "I mean, no offense, but that's a specific kind of baggage, isn't it? Takes a special person to sign up for that." The table went slightly quiet. Not completely. There were still the sounds of cutlery and a murmured side conversation at the end. but the specific silence of people waiting to see how something lands. Ethan set down his fork. "My son isn't baggage," he said. His voice was even. Not angry, just clear, the way you state a fact that isn't up for discussion. "He's 6. He likes dinosaurs and is learning to read chapter books, and he's the best thing I've ever built, so I'd be careful with that word." Derek blinked. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Ethan said. He glanced across the table at Victoria. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in it had. Some slight, almost imperceptible shift, like a window opened a crack. He picked his fork back up. The conversation moved on as conversations do, but something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and the quality of the silence around Ethan and Victoria for the rest of dinner had a different texture, quieter and strangely private. It was Pamela who delivered the final cruelty, though she probably thought she was being funny. Between the main course and dessert, she looked between Ethan and Victoria with the bright manufactured smile of someone about to land a punchline. "So James tells me this was actually a setup," she said, too loudly, the way people announce things they know will create a reaction. "Like a blind date kind of thing? I have to say," she laughed lightly, "this is not what I pictured when he said he was setting up 2 successful single people. I sort of expected—" She stopped herself, but too late. The damage was in what she didn't finish. What had she pictured? Ethan could guess. Someone sleeker, someone without sawdust in his past and a truck in the valet lot. Someone whose version of success came with the right packaging. He didn't look embarrassed. That surprised him, actually. He'd expected to feel that familiar prickle of being measured and found slightly lacking, a feeling he knew from client meetings early in the business, from rooms where he'd been the youngest or the roughest, or the one without the right last name. But sitting across from Victoria Sinclair, who was at this moment looking at Pamela with an expression of such composed and absolute indifference that it was almost beautiful, he just felt tired. Tired of the room, tired of the performance, tired of the particular kind of cruelty that small people aim at people they find threatening. "You know what?" Ethan said, catching Victoria's eye. "I think I'm done with the main course." Something flickered in her expression. Not quite a smile. Close. "So am I," she said. Eat. They ended up at the bar. Not by plan exactly, more by the shared gravitational pull of 2 people who have simultaneously decided they'd rather be anywhere else. The restaurant had a small bar area separated from the dining room by a half wall and some tasteful frosted glass. Victoria walked toward it first, and Ethan followed without discussion, as though they'd already agreed on something without speaking it. The bartender, a young man with the efficient manner of someone who'd overheard too many conversations to be surprised by any of them, asked what they wanted. "Bourbon," Ethan said. "Whatever's good." "Same," said Victoria, which surprised him. They sat on adjacent stools, leaving one between them, and for a moment neither spoke. The sounds of the dinner party filtered through the frosted glass, Garrett's laugh, Claire's voice, the clink of dessert spoons, and it felt very far away. "You didn't have to do that," Victoria said finally. "Do what?" "The thing with Derek, the baggage comment." Ethan shrugged. "He was wrong. People say wrong things at dinner parties. It's not usually considered an emergency." "It bothered you," he said. She turned to look at him. "How do you know that?" "Your grip on the wine glass. You hold it by the stem when you're annoyed. You tightened up every time someone took a shot at you all night." He paused. "Not a criticism. Just something I noticed." She was quiet for a moment, studying him. Up close, without the performance of the dinner table, she looked different, still composed, still precise, but tired in a way she'd been too careful to show before. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes that her makeup hadn't entirely erased. Her jaw, up close, carried a small tension that hadn't released even now, even away from the room. "That's an uncomfortable thing to have noticed," she said finally. "Yeah," he agreed. "Sorry." She almost smiled at that. "Don't be." The bourbon came. She picked up her glass, stem, he noted, and turned it once before drinking. "So," she said. "Single father." 6 years in, he said. You? 4. My daughter is Lily. She's 5. My son is Marcus. He's going to grow up to be either a marine biologist or a professional dinosaur expert. I'm supporting either path. This time she actually smiled, small and real, nothing like the polished expression she'd worn at the dinner table. It changed her face, made her look younger and less armored and more like a person who sometimes laughed at actual things. Lily has decided she's going to be an astronaut and also a chef, Victoria said. I'm told these are not mutually exclusive. They're not, Ethan said seriously. Space probably needs better food. She looked at him. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? James described you as a stand-up guy who works hard, which translates, in dinner party speak, to someone they were setting up as a charity project. Ethan felt that land because it was true. And what am I actually? She considered him for a moment with the same quality of attention she'd probably given to business plans and board presentations. Careful, without sentimentality, actually looking. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but you held your own back there without being an idiot about it, which puts you ahead of most people I've met tonight. High bar, he said. Surprisingly low bar, she replied, and this time the smile reached her eyes. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Ethan knew this because at some point he checked his phone and found 3 texts from James. Where did you go? Are you alive? Did you leave together? And one from Donna saying Marcus had brushed his teeth and gone to bed without much argument. He also realized, with a kind of quiet surprise, that he'd forgotten to feel out of place. It happened gradually. They'd started with the polite surface things. Her company, his company, the city, the dinner they'd escaped, and then, slowly, without either of them quite deciding to, they'd moved deeper. The conversation had the quality of something real, which was rarer than it should be. Victoria talked about building Sinclair Group from a 2-person operation in a rented office to what it was now, and she talked about it the way someone talks about a thing they've actually done. Not the polished version for press interviews, but the real version, with the mistakes and the close calls and the year she almost had to fold it all. I had $11,000 in my account, she said, which sounds like a lot until you have payroll for 6 people coming out of it and your biggest client has just pushed a payment 60 days. What did you do? I called every contact I had. I took a meeting on a Saturday morning. I pitched to a fund that had already passed on us once. She paused. They said yes the second time. I still don't know exactly why. Because you showed up on a Saturday morning, he said. She looked at him. People who show up when it's inconvenient, he said, tend to be the ones who mean it. She was quiet for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small recalibration, the way people look when something unexpected turns out to be true. Your turn, she said. So he told her. Not everything. It was still a first conversation, but enough. He told her about the year Marcus's mother left, which was also the year he'd just taken on his first real commercial project and was running the company on 4 hours of sleep and the specific adrenaline of knowing you cannot fail because someone small is depending on you. He told her about dropping Marcus at daycare and getting back in the truck and sitting in the parking lot for 5 minutes every morning before he could make himself start the engine and drive to the job site. Not crying, just sitting, needing that 5 minutes before he could be the version of himself the day required. I used to do the same thing in my car before conference calls, Victoria said quietly. Yeah? Lily's daycare was 3 blocks from my office. I'd drop her off and sit in the parking garage for about 10 minutes, just recalibrating. She paused. I told myself it was to review my notes. And actually, I was just trying to find the gear shift between being her mom and being the person who had to go run a company. He nodded. It's a real shift, he said. People who haven't done it don't get how different those 2 modes are. They really don't, she said. And she said it simply, without bitterness, just the mild acknowledgement of something true. Outside, the city moved past the restaurant windows, headlights and pedestrians and the ordinary business of Saturday night in a city that didn't stop for anyone's dinner conversation. Ethan's bourbon glass was empty. He hadn't ordered a second. Victoria's was almost empty too. Can I ask you something? He said. Probably. The people tonight, the comments, the looks, the whole thing. Does that happen a lot? In your professional life? She turned her glass once on the bar. The gender version of it, yes. The single mother version of it, also yes. The particular combination of both, which is what tonight was, she exhaled. It doesn't happen as much as it used to. I've gotten better at either not noticing or not showing that I notice. You noticed tonight, he said. The grip. My tells are apparently still works in progress. She glanced sideways at him. You're observant. Occupational habit. Construction is about seeing what's actually there versus what people tell you is there. You develop an eye for structural problems. You just compared me to a structural problem. I compared your tells to one. There's a difference. He paused. For what it's worth, nothing they said tonight was accurate. She looked at him steadily. Which part? The baggage part. The too much to take on part. The idea that two people who've built things alone somehow have less to offer. He shook his head. That's not baggage. That's called experience. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. You're going to be a problem, she said finally. How so? I had a very clear plan for tonight. Attend, survive, leave. Don't engage. She set her glass down. I've been here almost 2 hours and engaged considerably more than I planned. Is that bad? She considered. I genuinely don't know yet. He smiled, small, genuine, the kind that doesn't try too hard. Honest answer. I tend toward those, she said. Me too, he said. It makes dinner parties harder. It makes everything harder, she said. But it tends to make the actual important things easier. He looked at her. She was looking at him. Something passed between them. Not dramatic, not electric in the movie sense, just real. The particular recognition of two people who have spent years being honest in rooms where honesty wasn't fashionable. Outside at 11:47 on a Saturday night, with the valet having retrieved his truck and her car service 3 minutes away on the app, they stood on the sidewalk in the mild spring air and had the specific awkward pause of two people who had not planned for the conversation to matter. I should check in with my sitter, he said. I should check my messages. Lily's with my mother tonight, and she has a tendency to send photos every 45 minutes. Is that terrible? The photos are always slightly blurry because she holds the phone wrong, Victoria said. Every single one. For 4 years. He laughed. Genuinely, the kind that caught him slightly off guard. She smiled at the sound of it. Her car arrived. She picked up her bag, and for a moment she just stood there. And Ethan had the impression she was making a calculation. Not about him, exactly, but about something larger. About what she was willing to allow and what she'd spent years being careful not to allow, and whether those two things were about to stop being the same list. Thank you, she said finally, for the thing with Derek. I told you. I know what you told me. I'm thanking you anyway. She paused. And for the conversation, it was... She seemed to search for the word, rejecting several before landing on the honest one. Unexpected. Yeah, he said. It was. She nodded once, that CEO nod, the decision made, and opened the car door. Then she stopped. Carter Construction, she said. You're on the Meridian project until September? That's the current timeline, he said, slightly wary. Why? Sinclair Group is evaluating 2 commercial developments in the adjacent block. I'll have my team send you the prospectus. She met his eyes. If the numbers make sense on both ends, it might be worth a conversation. He looked at her. Is that business or... It's business, she said. It might also be an excuse to have a conversation that doesn't involve Derek Walsh. He held her gaze. I can make that work. She got in the car. The door closed. He watched the black car pull away from the curb, merge into traffic, and disappear around the corner. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cool night air. Then he got his truck from the valet, tipped the man, and pulled out into traffic heading home. He got back at 12:17. Donna was awake, finishing the puzzle, and told him Marcus hadn't stirred. He thanked her, saw her to the door, locked up behind her. Then he went down the hall and stood in the doorway of his son's room for a moment. the nightlight casting everything in a soft amber. Marcus, a small lump under the blankets, with one arm thrown over the edge of the bed like he'd fallen asleep mid-reach. Ethan stood there for a long time. He wasn't thinking about the dinner, particularly, or about Derek's comment, or about James's transparent scheming. He was thinking about a woman who held her wine glass by the stem and sat in parking garages to find the gear shift between the person she was to her daughter and the person she was to the world. He was thinking about the particular recognition of meeting someone whose way of carrying hard things was different from yours, but not unfamiliar. He was thinking about how long it had been since a conversation had felt like that. He finally went to bed at 1:15. His alarm was set for 6. Marcus would be up at 6:15, which was earlier than the alarm, because Marcus was reliably 6:15 regardless of what any alarm thought about it. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not hope, exactly, because he was too careful for hope. Too many years of practical problem-solving had made him wary of things he couldn't measure. But something adjacent to it, something in the same neighborhood, something that felt, cautiously and without permission, like the beginning of something. The prospectus arrived on a Wednesday morning, forwarded from the Sinclair Group's development office to Carter Construction's main email. Ethan's project coordinator, a sharp 26-year-old named Brianna, who had a gift for flagging things that mattered, printed it and left it on his desk with a sticky note that said simply, "This is big. Call me when you've read it." He read it over lunch, a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks from the job site, eaten at his desk with one hand while he turned pages with the other. The Sinclair Group was evaluating 2 adjacent commercial parcels on Harmon Street, roughly 3 blocks from the Meridian development where Carter Construction was currently pouring foundations. The proposed development was significant. Mixed use, 12 stories, the kind of project that would take 18 months minimum and require a contractor with both the capacity and the track record to handle a client who clearly did not accept approximations. His name was in the cover letter, not the company's name. His name. Mr. Carter, based on Carter Construction's current work on the Meridian development and our team's assessment of your project management approach, we believe there may be a basis for conversation. He read that line twice. Then he put the prospectus down and finished his sandwich. He called Brianna in. Pull everything we have on the Sinclair Group. Structure of their previous development deals, what contractors they've used, timelines, how they handle cost overruns. Brianna was already writing. You want the full profile? Yeah. He paused. And don't make it weird. She looked up. Make what weird? Just thorough, professional, standard. She stared at him for a moment with the particular expression of a 26-year-old who has already figured out more than she's been told. Okay, she said, and left. He called Victoria that evening. Not impulsively. He waited until Marcus was in bed, then sat at the kitchen table with the prospectus in front of him and dialed the number on the cover letter, which was a direct line to her assistant, which was the professional thing to do. The assistant, a man named Robert who spoke with careful efficiency, told him that Miss Sinclair was available Thursday at 2 or Friday at 9. Thursday at 2, Ethan said. Thursday at 2, it turned out, was not a conference room meeting with a full development team. It was Victoria, in her office on the 14th floor of the Sinclair Group building, with 2 cups of coffee already on the table when he arrived. Her office was not what he'd expected, which he realized he should have expected because very little about her was what he expected. He'd anticipated something sleek and intimidating. The CEO command center, all glass and city views and furniture that communicated power. There was glass, and there were city views, but the desk was covered in the organized chaos of actual work. Stacked reports, a tablet with a half-finished presentation, a coffee mug that had clearly been there since morning. On the windowsill, slightly incongruous, was a small ceramic elephant with a chipped ear, the obvious craft of a child's hand. Lily, he understood. I wasn't sure you'd call, she said when he sat down. You sent a prospectus, he said. I call back when someone sends a prospectus. People don't always. Then they're leaving money on the table, he said, which made her smile. Brief, real, the same small smile from Saturday night that changed her face without warning. They talked business for an hour. Real business, like He'd done his homework and she'd clearly done hers, and the conversation moved the way good professional conversations do when both people actually know what they're talking about. He asked direct questions about their timeline expectations, and she answered directly, including the parts that weren't ideal. She pushed back on his preliminary cost estimates, and he explained his reasoning without defensiveness, and she listened, which was rarer than it should have been. By the end of the hour, they hadn't agreed on anything formal, but the outline of an agreement was visible, the way the shape of a building is visible in a set of plans before a single piece of ground has been broken. "I'll have my team prepare a formal proposal," he said, gathering his notes. "Good." She paused. "How's Marcus?" He looked up. The shift was so clean and direct, from quarterly projections to his 6-year-old, that it caught him slightly off guard. "He's good. Lost a tooth last week." He was deeply concerned about the structural integrity of the rest of them. She laughed at that, a real laugh, unguarded. "Lily has been refusing to let any of her teeth come loose. She's convinced the adult ones aren't worth it." "Valid concern," he said. They looked at each other across the coffee cups and the prospectus and the space between the professional conversation and the other conversation, the one that was always running parallel, quieter underneath. "Coffee sometime?" he said. "Not a meeting, just coffee." She held his gaze for a moment. "I have about 45 minutes between 7 and 8 on weekday mornings before things get complicated." "That's specific. I'm a specific person." "Thursday," he said, 7:15. "There's a place called Grounds on Mercer Street. Good coffee, no atmosphere. Very honest about both." She considered. "Thursday," she said. He left the building and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the mid-afternoon sun, aware that he was smiling and making no particular effort to stop. Grounds on Mercer Street was, as advertised, entirely without atmosphere. Bare brick walls, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu and handwriting that suggested the person who wrote it was either an artist or someone with very strong feelings about chalk. The coffee was excellent. The tables were small. It was the kind of place where people went to actually drink coffee, rather than to be seen drinking it, which was exactly why Ethan had chosen it. Victoria arrived at 7:13, which told him that she was the kind of person who arrived slightly early but never admitted it. She was in her work clothes, a charcoal blazer, dark trousers, the efficient precision of someone whose first meeting of the day started at 8:30. But her hair was down, which was different from Thursday's meeting. A small thing. He noticed it. She looked at the chalkboard menu for approximately 4 seconds, ordered a cortado with no hesitation, and sat down. "You look like someone who's already been up for 2 hours, he said. "Lily had a nightmare at 4:30, she said. "She was fine within 10 minutes, but I was not fine until about 6:15. Marcus's nightmares last about 45 seconds, and then he's back asleep and I'm staring at the ceiling for an hour," Ethan said. "It's one of the fundamental injustices of parenting." "The complete list of fundamental injustices of parenting is very long. We'd need more coffee. We'd need a different establishment," she said. And it was easy, the ease of people who'd already gotten past the careful part of conversation without entirely meaning to. They talked for 51 minutes. He knew because she had an 8:30 and checked her watch at 8:19 with the practiced efficiency of someone who had trained themselves to leave rooms before they were late rather than after. But for those 51 minutes, they talked the way they had at the bar on Saturday night, without the performance of it, without the particular social choreography that most early conversations required. She told him about a board meeting that week that had gone sideways in a specific way she was still processing. He told her about a subcontractor dispute on the Meridian project that he'd had to resolve by driving to the site at 6 in the morning and having a conversation that was uncomfortable but necessary. "Did it work?" she asked. "Define work." "Did the problem get resolved?" "Yes." "Did the guy like me afterward?" "No." "You can't always have both," she said. "No," he agreed. "You really can't." There was a pause and she was looking at her coffee cup, and he had the impression she was about to say something that was harder than the rest of the conversation. He was right. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said, "because I think you're a straightforward person, and it would be patronizing to be otherwise." "Okay," he said. "I like talking to you on Saturday. I like talking to you now. I think—" She paused, choosing the word with the care of someone who means exactly what she says. I think you're a genuinely decent person, which is rarer than the phrase suggests. Another pause. And I'm also someone who has spent 4 years building very deliberate walls around herself and her daughter, and I don't dismantle those quickly or easily. Not because I'm closed off, but because Lily has already had people come and go in a way that... She stopped. In a way that cost her something, Ethan said quietly. Victoria looked up. Yes, he nodded. He understood that. Not theoretically. He understood it the way you understand things that have happened to your own child. That particular specific ache of watching a small person learn that people don't always stay. I'm not asking you to dismantle anything, he said. I'm asking if you want to get coffee again next Thursday. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, yes, she said, simply. Okay then, he said. She left for her 8:30. He stayed for a second cup and sat with the particular quiet of a morning that had gone unexpectedly well, which was its own kind of strange. The coffees became a routine before either of them named it as one. Thursday mornings at 7:15, grounds on Mercer, cortado for her, and whatever the day's single-origin pour-over was for him. Some mornings they talked about work, his projects, her company's expansion strategy, the Harmon Street development that was moving toward a formal proposal. Some mornings they talked about their kids. Some mornings they talked about things that had nothing to do with either. A book she was reading that turned out to be about a subject he knew more about than expected. A neighborhood in the city he'd worked in for years that she'd never explored. The particular ongoing debate about whether the diner 2 blocks from Carter Construction or the one near her office had better pie, which they resolved by going to both on separate Thursdays and conducting what Victoria called a rigorous comparative analysis. Her diner won on the strength of its lemon meringue, which Ethan conceded was objectively superior. He did not concede this quickly or without argument. She found this funnier than the lemon meringue probably deserved. The business relationship formalized in the 6th week. Carter Construction submitted a proposal for the Harmon Street development. The Sinclair Group's development team, 3 sharp people who very clearly knew they were evaluating a contractor their CEO had a personal relationship with and were being scrupulously professional about it, asked good questions. Ethan answered them. His numbers were solid and his track record was documented, and his plan for managing the timeline complexity of a 12-story mixed-use build was detailed without being defensive. They came back with counterpoints. He revised where revision was warranted and held where it wasn't and explained the difference clearly. Victoria was not in those meetings. This was deliberate, and he respected it. She was drawing a clean line, and the line said, the business stands on its own or it doesn't stand. He had the same feeling about it. He didn't want the contract because she liked him. He wanted it because Carter Construction had earned it. They got the contract in week 8. Brianna sent him a text at 7 in the morning that said only, "We got it," followed by a string of construction-related emojis. He was at grounds with Victoria when the text came in. He showed her the screen. She looked at it and then looked at him. "Congratulations," she said. "My team negotiated hard. I know, they're good. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," he said. And he meant it with the plain directness of someone who says things they mean. She looked at him for a moment with something in her expression that was complicated and honest and not fully resolved. Then she picked up her cortado. "Okay," she said. The first time he met Lily was an accident. Victoria had mentioned one Thursday that her regular Saturday afternoon arrangement with her mother had fallen through. Her mother had a conflict, and that she was going to need to rearrange her afternoon, which included a call she'd been trying to schedule for 2 weeks. She said it the way she said most inconvenient things. Factually, without complaint, already calculating solutions. "Bring her to the Meridian site," Ethan said. Victoria looked at him. "To a construction site?" "To a safe, properly cordoned, professionally managed construction site on a Saturday when no active work is happening. Kids love construction sites," he paused. "Or Marcus loves construction sites. He talks about the equipment like they're personal friends." He named the excavator Gerald. "Lily would have questions," Victoria said carefully. "About the equipment. About you." He looked at her steadily. Is that a problem? She was quiet for a moment. This was the wall she'd told him about. Not dramatic, not a door slamming, just the careful deliberateness of a person who had learned to be careful. He didn't push. He waited, which he'd found was the thing she responded to most. Not pressure, not reassurance, just patience. She'll want to know if you're my friend, Victoria said finally. I am your friend, he said. She'll want to know if you're going to be around. I'm not going to lie to her, he said, and I'm not going to make promises I don't know yet if I can keep. But I can be honest with her about what I am right now, which is someone who likes her mom and thinks excavators named Gerald are a legitimate subject of interest. Victoria looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. Saturday. Lily Sinclair was 5 years old and approximately the most forthright human being Ethan had encountered in recent memory. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's quality of attention. That direct, assessing gaze that made you feel slightly like you were being evaluated for a position you hadn't applied for. She was wearing a yellow raincoat despite the fact that it was not raining, which she explained immediately and without prompting. Yellow is easier to see if you get lost. He could not argue with this logic. He told her so. Mom says that too, Lily said, with the satisfaction of someone whose position has been validated. She turned and looked at Gerald the excavator. What's his name? Gerald, Ethan said. She nodded seriously. Gerald is a good name for an excavator. That's what Marcus said. Who's Marcus? My son. He's 6. She considered this. Is he nice? Usually. Sometimes he argues about bedtime. I argue about bedtime too, she said, slightly relieved. She looked at him directly. Are you Mom's friend? Yes, he said. A real friend or a work friend? He glanced at Victoria, who was standing slightly behind Lily with an expression that was carefully neutral. He looked back at Lily. A real friend, he said, the kind that gets coffee on Thursday mornings. Lily seemed to process this. Mom's real friends are hard to find, she said finally, with the frank authority of someone who had observed this for 5 years. She doesn't have very many. Lily, Victoria said quietly. It's true, Lily said without apology. It's okay, Ethan said, meeting Victoria's eyes briefly. I know it's true. They spent 2 hours at the site. Lily asked 47 questions. Ethan did not count them, but it felt like 47. About how buildings got built, why concrete was gray, whether Gerald had feelings, how tall 12 stories was, whether the workers had to eat lunch up high or could come down, and what happened if it rained on cement. He answered all of them directly, and without simplifying things she didn't need to have simplified. And somewhere around question 23, she slipped her hand into his to cross a section of the site, the way children sometimes do with adults they've decided to trust, with no ceremony and no announcement, just the small weight of her hand in his. Victoria, walking beside them, saw it. He didn't look at her when it happened, but he heard the slight change in her breathing, very small, very quiet. And he understood that this particular moment was one that mattered. And he held Lily's hand carefully and showed her where the foundation would eventually meet the street, and said nothing about the moment at all. On the way back to the site entrance, Lily, who had apparently been conducting some kind of internal deliberation, looked up at him and said, Can Marcus come next time? Ethan looked at Victoria. Something in her expression was working very hard to stay composed and not quite managing. That's up to your mom, he said. Mom? Lily said, turning. Victoria looked at her daughter for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan, and what was in her face was complicated and honest, and a little bit terrified, and something else that she was clearly not ready to name yet. We'll see, she said. Which was not no. That evening, after Victoria had texted him a photo of Lily's drawing of Gerald the excavator, rendered in yellow crayon with what appeared to be a smile, he sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Marcus was in bed. The house was quiet. The drawing photo was on his phone screen, and he thought about Lily's hand in his and Victoria's face at that moment, and the wall she'd told him about, and how walls don't come down all at once, but in sections, the way demolition actually works. Careful, deliberate, one piece at a time, so the structure doesn't collapse wrong. He thought about how long he'd been doing everything alone. Not sadly, he'd made his peace with it, mostly. the way you make peace with a condition of your life that you didn't choose, but that has become so familiar it's just the weather. He'd built a life for Marcus and built a business, and convinced himself that those two things together were enough, were the whole picture, and that the space where something else might have gone was just space, not absence. Sitting in his quiet kitchen at 10:30 at night, he wasn't so sure anymore. He texted Victoria, "Tell Lily Gerald says hi." She responded 3 minutes later with a photo of Lily, already in pajamas, holding the yellow crayon drawing up to the camera with a triumphant expression. Then, a separate text, just from Victoria. She talked about the site for an hour and a half straight. I had to institute a 10-minute rule. He smiled at his phone. Marcus did the same thing after his first visit. 3 years ago. He still talks about it. A pause. Then, "She asked me if you were going to come back." He looked at that message for a long moment. His thumbs moved. "What did you tell her?" Another pause, longer. "I told her I thought so. I hope that was okay." He typed back, "It was okay." Then, after a moment, "It was more than okay." No response for several minutes. He was about to set his phone down when it buzzed. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Victoria." He set his phone face down on the table. The house was still quiet. Outside, the city did what it always did. Moved, hummed, continued without interruption. But something inside the quiet of this particular house felt different than it had this morning, and different than it had for a long time before that. Not fixed, not resolved, not the neat conclusion that life rarely offered, just different. Like a room where someone has opened a window that's been shut for years, and the air has changed without anyone deciding it should. The weeks after that had the particular texture of something that was not yet what it was going to be, but was clearly becoming it. Victoria was not a person who moved toward things without looking first. She examined, assessed, considered. She did not fall. She decided, carefully, 1 foot at a time, testing the ground. He respected this. He was not himself a reckless person. He had a child. Recklessness was a luxury he'd traded away a long time ago. But within those careful movements, things were shifting. She started texting him things that weren't about the business. A news article she thought he'd find interesting, a photo of something Lily had said at breakfast that was too good not to share, once a very early morning message that just said, "Terrible meeting. Tell me something normal." He'd responded with a 3-sentence account of Marcus's ongoing war with a particular sock that he refused to wear because it felt, in Marcus's exact words, too loud. She'd sent back a single laughing emoji and then, back to it. "Thank you." He noticed she laughed differently when no one else was watching. At the dinner, her smiles had been controlled, deployed with precision. In their Thursday mornings, the laughter had been freer, but still, there were layers, still the awareness of being observed. But in the quieter moments, a text exchange at 9 at night, a phone call that started about the Harmon Street project and drifted sideways. She laughed with her whole face, and he could hear it even through a phone, the difference between the guarded version and the real one. He didn't push. He had learned, in ways that had cost him, that pushing people toward things they weren't ready for produced the opposite of what you wanted. He showed up on Thursday mornings. He responded when she reached out. He was consistent in the way that he was consistent in every area of his life. Not dramatic, not performed, just present. One Thursday became 2. 2 became a month. A month became 2. Marcus met Lily on a Saturday in March, at a park equidistant from both their apartments, with no ceremony and no introduction that suggested anything was expected of them. They were told simply that they were friends' kids who were meeting at a park, and their job was to exist in the same space and do park things. Marcus spent the first 8 minutes watching Lily with the cautious assessment of a 6-year-old who had learned to be slightly careful about the world. Lily spent the first 4 minutes deciding and the next 4 minutes following Marcus to the swings and announcing that she knew how to pump her legs properly. And did he? He did not, entirely. She showed him. The lesson was delivered with patient authority. By the time Ethan and Victoria sat down on the bench that was theoretically supervision, but had become, without discussion, a parallel conversation of their own, Marcus and Lily were on adjacent swings, arguing companionably about whether you could reach the clouds if you swung high enough. He said no. Victoria noted, watching them. Lily maintains that it depends on the clouds. She's not wrong, Ethan said. That's what I told her. A pause. He's sweet with her. He could have blown her off. He doesn't really do that. He's a careful kid. Like his father, she said, and it was said quietly, with something in it that was more than an observation. He looked at her. She was watching the kids, not him, and her profile in the afternoon light showed the weariness she still carried. Always there, not always visible. The particular weight of someone who had been strong for a long time without much of a break. He had the impulse, not for the first time, to say something. To name the thing that was sitting between them, had been sitting there for weeks, growing specific and real. He held back, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this was hers to open when she was ready. He'd told her he was her friend, and he meant it, and the kind of friend that mattered was the kind who didn't make things harder by needing too much too soon. So he just sat beside her in the afternoon sun and watched their kids debate cloud proximity on adjacent swings, and let the moment be what it was, and that was enough. For now, it was enough. Though he noticed, when Marcus made Lily laugh hard enough that she nearly fell off her swing, that Victoria reached over without looking and put her hand briefly over his, just for a second, just the light pressure of it, and then took it away. Like punctuation. Like something said in a language they were still learning but were very clearly beginning to speak, the hand on his. Just a second. Just the light pressure of it, and then gone. He didn't mention it the following Thursday. Neither did she. But something had shifted in the specific gravity of their Thursday mornings. The coffee tasted the same, the chairs were the same mismatched grounds-on Mercer chairs. But the air between them had changed in the way air changes after weather, cleaner and slightly charged, like something had passed through and left the atmosphere different than it found it. April came in wet and cold, the kind of spring that didn't commit to itself, still throwing March at people 3 weeks in. The Harmon Street project had broken ground, and Ethan was splitting his time between 2 active sites, which meant his days started at 5:30 and didn't stop being complicated until around 8 at night, when Marcus's bedtime routine finally wound down and the house went quiet. He was tired in the bone-deep way of someone running at full capacity with no real margin, which was not new. This had been his operating mode for years, but he was aware of it more lately, maybe because there was now a Thursday morning every week where he sat still for 50 minutes and noticed what his body felt like when it wasn't moving. Victoria was in a growth cycle at Sinclair Group that had her in back-to-back days of investor calls, board presentations, and what she described one Thursday as a negotiation that technically ended but spiritually continues. She had dark circles she was no longer entirely hiding, and a sharpness to her that wasn't unfriendly but was the particular edge of someone running on less sleep than the situation warranted. They were not a couple. They had not said the word. They had not had the conversation. What they were was something that existed in the space before that conversation, something real and specific and without a clean label, which was both fine and, increasingly, not entirely fine. The way a temporary arrangement stops feeling temporary when it's been the arrangement for long enough. Marcus noticed before Ethan was ready for him to. It was a Sunday in late April. They'd had their second park day. Marcus and Lily, Ethan and Victoria, the same bench, the same parallel conversations, and afterward Ethan had taken Marcus home for lunch. They were at the kitchen table, peanut butter sandwiches, Marcus's preferred medium for discussing anything of importance, and Marcus said, without looking up from the architectural project he was building with his sandwich crusts, "Is Victoria your girlfriend?" Ethan set down his water glass. "Why do you ask?" "James at school has a mom and she has a boyfriend, and they hold hands sometimes, and James says it's gross, but I don't think it's gross." Marcus looked up. "You don't hold hands, but you look at her the same way." Ethan considered his 6-year-old for a moment. "What way is that?" Marcus thought about it seriously. "Like when you're checking a building, like you're making sure it's okay." Ethan was quiet for a moment. The accuracy of this was uncomfortable in the specific way that children's observations sometimes were, cutting directly to the thing without the benefit of social grace to soften it. "She's my friend," Ethan said. "A very good friend." Marcus absorbed this. "Can she come to my dinosaur thing at school?" "What dinosaur thing?" "The museum trip. Parents can come." He looked at Ethan with the practical directness of someone solving a logistics problem. You could bring her. She could sit with you. I'll think about it, Ethan said. Lily could come too, Marcus offered. Lily likes dinosaurs, she told me at the park. He mentioned it to Victoria on Thursday, half expecting her to deflect. Too much, too soon, too much of a statement about what this was. Instead, she was quiet for a moment and then said, What day is the museum trip? Second Friday in May. She checked something on her phone. I have a 10 o'clock I can move, she said. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. What time does the bus leave? The museum trip was a 40-child chaos event with color-coded lanyards and a teacher named Mr. Vasquez who had the shell-shocked calm of a man who had chaperoned this particular field trip 11 times and no longer expected anything to go smoothly. Ethan had taken the morning off. Victoria arrived at the school parking lot at 8:50 in her work clothes, having apparently come directly from something, and was immediately assessed by Marcus with the focused gravity of a child determining whether a new variable fit the established system. You came, Marcus said to her. I said I would, she told him. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and then said, Do you know what a pachycephalosaurus is? I know what a pachycephalosaurus is, she said, which was either true or the most committed diplomatic bluff Ethan had ever witnessed. Marcus stared at her. Most grown-ups don't. I have a 5-year-old who went through a dinosaur phase last year, she said. I am battle-tested. Marcus turned to his father with an expression that communicated, plainly and without ambiguity, that he approved. Then he grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the bus line, leaving Victoria to fall into step beside them with what Ethan could have sworn was the most genuine smile he'd seen on her face yet. Lily had come with Victoria's mother, who materialized at the museum entrance with Lily in tow, a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and the precise manner of someone who had raised Victoria Sinclair and felt, accordingly, that she had earned the right to form opinions. She was introduced as Eleanor. She shook Ethan's hand with a grip that was evaluating something. He met her eyes and held them, which appeared to be the correct answer to whatever the question was, because she nodded once and turned her attention to the children. The dinosaur exhibit was, by any measure, a success. Marcus guided the group through it with the authority of a junior docent, explaining things to Lily with the particular patience of a child who has found someone genuinely interested in what he knows. Lily asked questions. Marcus answered them. Occasionally they disagreed on details and argued in the earnest, fact-based way of children who are both accustomed to being taken seriously by adults. Victoria and Ethan walked slightly behind them, not quite together, not quite separate, in the comfortable proximity of people who have stopped needing to justify why they keep ending up next to each other. Your son knows more about Cretaceous period fauna than most adults I've met, Victoria said. He's been preparing for this since he was 4, Ethan said. This exhibit specifically. He has strong feelings about the Pachycephalosaurus display. Strong feelings how? He thinks the museum underestimates it. He wrote them a letter. Victoria stopped walking. He wrote the museum a letter. He dictated it. I typed. It was 2 paragraphs and very professional. He paused. They didn't write back. That's outrageous, she said with complete sincerity. That's what Marcus said. She laughed and they walked on, and Eleanor, who had drifted close enough to observe without appearing to observe, watched them with the careful attention of a woman who had been waiting a long time to see her daughter laugh like that. The day ended in the school parking lot, the 2 kids exchanging a formal handshake that Marcus had initiated. Where he'd gotten this, Ethan had no idea. And then Lily said, "Same next time," to Marcus, with the confident expectation of someone for whom next times were established facts. Yeah, Marcus said, equally certain. Ethan and Victoria stood at her car while Eleanor settled Lily into the back seat. The afternoon had gone long and the light was going golden in the particular way it did in May, making the ordinary parking lot look briefly like something worth photographing. Thank you for coming, Ethan said. Marcus has very good instincts about dinosaurs, she said, and about people. A pause. He's a good kid, Ethan. Yeah, he said. He is. She looked at him, and there was something in her face that was open in a way it rarely was, unguarded in the way the end of a long, good day sometimes made people, when the defenses have been down long enough that putting them back up feels like too much effort. "I had a really good day," she said. It was simple, undecorated, exactly the kind of thing she said when she meant it entirely. "Me too," he said. She got in her car. He walked to his truck. He sat for a moment before starting the engine, and he thought, this is the thing. This ordinary day with the color-coded lanyards and the Pachycephalosaurus argument and Eleanor's evaluating handshake and the kids' formal parking lot farewell, this is the thing he hadn't known he was missing. Not the grand version of it, the actual version. He started the engine and drove home and did not let himself think about it too hard, because thinking too hard about things that were fragile had a history of making them more fragile, and he had learned to be careful with things he couldn't afford to break. It was a Wednesday evening in the third week of May when it happened, the thing that rearranged everything. Victoria had asked the previous Thursday whether Ethan might be free on Wednesday evening. Her regular sitter had a conflict, and she had a work call she couldn't move that was going to run until at least 7, and her mother was unavailable. She'd framed it as a practical request, which it was, but the fact that she was asking him was its own kind of statement, one she either didn't notice or had decided to stop pretending she didn't notice. "I'll bring Marcus," he said. "They can do homework, or whatever Lily calls homework, at 5. "She calls it her papers," Victoria said. "She's very serious about her papers." He arrived at Victoria's apartment at 5:30 with Marcus, who came equipped with a dinosaur encyclopedia and a backpack containing enough snacks for a small expedition. Victoria's apartment was, this surprised him, though he registered immediately that it shouldn't, warm. Not the minimalist executive residence he might have imagined, but an actual home. Lily's drawings on the refrigerator, a reading corner that had clearly been used that morning, a kitchen that smelled like whatever Victoria had stress-cooked the night before. There were throw pillows on the couch that didn't match, and a small collection of plants in the window with the slightly irregular care of someone who meant to water them more consistently. Victoria was on her phone when they arrived, one finger raised in the apology of someone mid-call, and she pointed toward the living room with the easy authority of someone who had decided this was fine. Ethan took the kids to the living room. Marcus opened his encyclopedia. Lily produced her papers. They sat at the coffee table with the natural efficiency of children who had decided they liked each other and didn't require adults to arrange the details. Ethan went to the kitchen, and because he was constitutionally incapable of sitting still in a room with a kitchen, looked in the refrigerator, found the component parts of a reasonable dinner, and started cooking. Victoria emerged from her call at 6:43, looking like someone who had survived a thing she hadn't fully prepared for, and found him at her stove. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. "You're cooking." "You had chicken and half an onion and some reasonable pantry items," he said, without turning around. "It would have been wasteful not to." She stared at him for a moment. "Most people would have ordered pizza." "I thought about pizza," he admitted, "but Lily said last time that she doesn't like the pizza place you usually order from." Victoria blinked. "When did she tell you that?" "Tuesday. She texted me." He glanced back. "She has your phone sometimes." Victoria opened her mouth and then closed it, apparently having decided that the picture of her 5-year-old conducting an independent texting relationship with Ethan Carter was something she would process later. She came into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and watched him cook for a moment. "How'd the call go, Sal?" he asked. "It went," she said, which was the Victoria Sinclair version of badly, but I handled it. "There's a shareholder who has been pushing a position on the Harmon Street development that's technically within his rights and practically very annoying." "Annoying how?" "He wants to slow the timeline. His reasoning is risk management. His actual motivation is leverage." She drank some water. "I've dealt with it. It's fine." "You say it's fine the same way I say the subcontractor situation is under control," he said. "And it usually means it's actually fine, but it cost you something to make it fine." She was quiet for a moment. "It cost me an afternoon I didn't have," she said. "And a specific kind of energy I'm running low on." He nodded. He didn't offer solutions she hadn't asked for or reassurances that would have been patronizing. He just turned back to the stove and adjusted the heat, and the quiet of the kitchen held them both for a moment without requiring anything. Dinner happened at her table, all 4 of them, Marcus explaining to Lily the plot of a dinosaur book with the passionate incoherence of someone who had read it 6 times and still found it thrilling, Lily interrupting with questions that were mostly tangential and completely earnest, Ethan and Victoria eating on either side of them and having the kind of conversation that ran parallel, his hand near hers on the table, not touching, the inches between them conscious. After dinner, Marcus fell asleep on the couch with the dinosaur encyclopedia open on his chest, which he would have denied was a possibility and which happened in about 8 minutes. Lily lasted another 20 minutes longer, conducting a thorough tour of her room for Ethan that included introductions to every stuffed animal and an explanation of their individual personalities before Victoria carried her to bed. Ethan sat in the living room with the sleeping Marcus and the quiet of a Wednesday evening in someone else's home, and felt the oddness of how not odd it felt. How naturally the evening had arranged itself. How little effort any of it had required, which was the thing he'd forgotten was possible. That some things, some arrangements of people, didn't require constant effort, didn't need to be held together by will, just held. Victoria came back from putting Lily down and sat on the other end of the couch, tucking her feet up under her. She looked at Marcus for a moment. "He went down fast," she said softly. "He always does when he's comfortable somewhere," Ethan said, equally quiet. She nodded. They sat with the sleeping child between them and the apartment dark except for the kitchen light and the sound of the city outside. And neither of them spoke for a moment, which was the particular silence of two people who have something to say and are deciding whether tonight is the night to say it. Then from down the hall, through the half-open bedroom door, Lily's voice, small, not quite asleep, the way children's voices get when they're in the borderland. "Ethan?" He looked at Victoria. She nodded slightly. "Go ahead." He got up and went down the hall and stood in the doorway of Lily's room. The nightlight cast the room in soft amber. Lily was on her side, the stuffed rabbit she'd introduced as Commander Bunn tucked under her arm, looking at him with heavy eyes. "Hey," he said quietly, "you should be asleep." "I know," she said. "I just had a question." "Okay." She was quiet for a moment, and he could tell she was organizing the question, the way she organized most things, with the careful seriousness of a child who had decided what she said mattered. When she spoke, her voice was small but direct, the way her mother's voice was direct, the same quality in a smaller register. "Are you staying this time?" He stood very still in the doorway. "Staying," he repeated carefully. "People come," she said, "and then they go. Mom's friend Dana came a lot, and then she didn't. And before that, there was someone else who used to come for dinner, and then one day he wasn't there anymore, and Mom said he moved away, but I don't think that was really the reason." She paused. "You've been coming for a while now. Marcus came. You cooked dinner." Her eyes were getting heavier, but she was holding on to the question. "Are you going to go away?" He stood there in the amber light of her nightlight with Commander Bunn and the organized stuffed animals, and the drawings he'd seen earlier now barely visible in the dark, and he felt the weight of what she was asking in a way that settled into his chest and stayed there. He could have said something careful, something hedged. He was a careful person, and hedged answers had their place, and he had a policy about promises he didn't know yet if he could keep. But he looked at this 5-year-old girl who had learned in 5 short years to ask the question that adults spent their whole lives trying to ask, and mostly didn't, and he understood that she deserved the truth, the actual truth, not the comfortable version of it. He crossed the room and crouched beside her bed so they were at the same level. "I'm not planning on going anywhere," he said. "I want to be very honest with you, because you're asking me an honest question. I don't know everything that's going to happen, but I know that I want to be here, and I know that I take that seriously." She looked at him. In the amber light with her heavy eyes, she looked very young and very old at the same time. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She closed her eyes. He waited until her breathing slowed, and then he got up and walked back down the hall to the living room, slowly, because his legs felt slightly strange beneath him, the way they did after something had shaken the foundation of something else. Victoria was standing at the edge of the hallway. She had heard. He could tell by the particular stillness of her, the way she was holding herself, very still, very controlled, and absolutely not managing it perfectly. "Hey," he said quietly. She turned away from him, not harshly. Just the movement of someone who needed a moment that they did not want witnessed. She went to the window and stood with her back to him, and he could see the effort in her shoulders, the rigid line of someone holding something in that was pressing hard on the inside. "Victoria," he said. "Give me a second," she said. Her voice was steady. Almost. He gave her a second. He sat down on the arm of the couch and waited, which was what he did, what he had always done. Not push, not fill the silence with reassurance she hadn't asked for, just stay. When she turned back, her eyes were dry, but it had been a near thing. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had just had a wall hit them from the inside. Not the outside pushing in, but the inside pushing out, which was different and harder to manage. "She's asked me that before," Victoria said quietly. "Are you staying? About different people, different situations?" She stopped. "She stopped asking for a while. I thought—" She pressed her lips together. "I thought maybe she'd stopped expecting the answer to be yes." He looked at her steadily. "She asked me," he said. "I know. That means something." "I know that too." She looked at him and he could see everything she was working with. The exhaustion and the hope and the fear and the years of being careful and the specific terror of a person who has been let down in ways that leave evidence on their children, evidence she has to watch her daughter carry. "Ethan, I meant it," he said. "What I told her. I don't say things I don't mean." "I know you don't." She crossed her arms, not defensively, just the hold of someone steadying themselves. That's actually the part that's hardest. Because I can dismiss people who aren't real. I can manage people who are performing. But you're not performing. You've never once performed. "No," he said. "And that means—" She stopped again. She looked at the ceiling briefly, the way people do when they're deciding something. When she looked back at him, her eyes were clear and direct and terrified and open all at once. "That means I have to actually deal with this." "Deal with what, specifically?" She looked at him for a long moment. "The fact that I think I'm in love with you," she said, "and that I have been for a while, and I have been very thoroughly ignoring it because it was easier and safer, and I am very good at doing the thing that is easier and safer when it comes to this particular subject." The apartment was very quiet. Marcus breathed steadily on the couch. Outside, the city continued without caring about any of it. Ethan got up from the arm of the couch. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close but not touching, and looked at her face. The exhaustion, the precision, the fear, the honesty that she couldn't seem to stop even when it scared her. "I know," he said. "I've known for a while." She blinked. "You knew?" "I noticed things," he said. Something shifted in her expression. "And you didn't say anything?" "You needed to say it yourself," he said. "When you were ready. Saying it for you wouldn't have been the same thing." She stared at him. For a moment, she looked like she might argue about this on principle, because she was Victoria Sinclair, and arguing on principle was a reflex. Then the argument dissolved, and what was left was just her, without the layers, without the armor, just tired and real and standing in her own living room at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, having told the truth. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. Her grip was immediate and firm, not tentative. This was not someone testing the water. This was someone who had decided and was not going back. "I'm not good at this," she said. Her voice was quieter now. "Historically." "Neither am I," he said. "Historically. We're both disasters in this specific area. We've both done fine in every other area," he said. "I think we can figure this one out." She looked at their hands, then up at him. "I need it to be slow," she said. "For Lily, for me." "I know," he said. "I've always known that. And I need—" She hesitated. "I need you to understand that the moment I'm scared, my first instinct is to pull back. I'm working on it, but I want you to know that's not the same as pulling away," he said. "Yes." She looked slightly surprised that he'd completed it. "Yes, exactly. I know the difference," he said. "I've been paying attention." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the particular recalibration happening. The adjusting of a person to a new truth, the way you adjust to a room after someone's changed the light. Not immediately comfortable. Not easy. But real. Okay, she said, quietly. Fully. Okay, he said. He stayed another hour, until Marcus woke up with the mild confusion of a child who had fallen asleep in one location and was startled to find himself in another. Ethan got him into his jacket and his shoes with the practiced efficiency of a father who had done this in multiple states of child wakefulness. At the door, Victoria crouched to Marcus's level and said, "Thank you for the dinosaur facts tonight." Marcus, half asleep, gave this serious consideration. Which ones helped the most? "The Pachycephalosaurus," she said, without hesitation. He nodded, satisfied, and went to stand beside Ethan in the hallway. Victoria stood and looked at Ethan, and what passed between them in that doorway was quiet and undramatic and completely understood by both of them. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. He took Marcus to the elevator. In the lobby, Marcus took his hand, and they walked out into the night, and Marcus said sleepily, "Victoria is good at dinosaurs." "She is," Ethan agreed. "She's a good friend," Marcus said. Ethan looked down at him. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Marcus seemed to think this over for the length of the walk to the truck. When Ethan lifted him into his car seat and was buckling him in, Marcus looked up at him with the serious, slightly glazed expression of a child working something out on the edge of sleep. "Dad?" he said. "Yeah, bud." "I think she's more than a friend," Marcus said. "I think she's the good kind." Ethan looked at his son for a moment. 6 years old, sleeping in the enemy's encyclopedia, an unerring eye for structure. "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice low. "I think you're right." He closed the car door gently. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the spring night, the city humming its ordinary hum. Nothing changed, and everything changed, the way it always was when the thing that mattered had finally been said out loud. He drove home. He did not try to think about the future in any organized way because some things had to be allowed to exist for a moment before you started building plans around them. He just drove through the lit city and felt the particular weight of a night that it held, in its ordinary Wednesday hours, something that would take a long time to fully understand. In the back seat, Marcus was asleep before they hit the first stoplight. The Thursday after the Wednesday that changed everything was different in the small ways that mattered. Victoria was already at grounds when he arrived, which had never happened before. She was always 7:13 to his 7:10, the slight lateness of someone managing a 5-year-old's morning. But she was there when he pushed open the door, Cortado already in front of her, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that was trying to be normal and was mostly succeeding except for a particular quality of attention in her eyes that hadn't been there before Wednesday, or had been there and was no longer pretending it hadn't. He sat down. The bartender brought his pour-over without being asked, which was what happened when you came to the same place every Thursday for 3 months. Ethan wrapped his hands around the cup and looked at Victoria, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "This isn't weird," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "It's not." "Good." She drank her cortado. "I was slightly worried it would be weird." "We talked about a lot of things Wednesday night," he said. "This isn't the strange part." She nodded. Then, after a pause, "Lily asked me this morning if you were coming back soon." "What did you tell her?" "I told her yes." She met his eyes. "I told her Thursday." He looked at her. "So she knows Thursday is a thing." "Lily knows everything," Victoria said. "I've accepted this." The morning went the way their Thursday mornings went. Work, kids, the city, the particular rhythm of two people who had found a frequency that worked. But underneath it now was something that had been unnamed before and was named now, which changed the texture of the ordinary things. When she laughed, he let himself look at her longer than he used to. When she talked about the Harmon Street complications, a permitting delay that was going to require adjusting the foundation pour schedule, which was his problem as much as hers, he leaned slightly toward her across the small table, and she didn't lean away. At 8:19, she checked her watch. He said, Saturday, the four of us. There's a botanical garden Marcus has been asking about. She looked up from her watch. I'll bring the lemon meringue diner's takeout coffee, she said. The one that beat yours. My diner's coffee was robbed, he said. The lemon meringue was decisive, she said, and stood up and paused at the edge of the table in the way she sometimes did when she was deciding something. And then she leaned down and pressed her mouth briefly to his cheek, close to the corner of his mouth, not quite, warm and quick and deliberate, and then straightened and picked up her bag and walked out before he had fully processed what had just happened. He sat in the mismatched chair at the small table with his hand wrapped around a coffee cup, and the feeling of that brief warmth still on his face, and the young bartender who had overheard and observed everything for 3 months and kept it entirely to himself, refilled his cup without comment, which was the exact right thing to do. June moved in and settled like something that had decided to stay. The Harmon Street project found its footing after the permitting issue resolved. 3 weeks of back and forth with the city office that Ethan handled with the particular patience of someone who had learned that bureaucracy responded to persistence more than pressure. Victoria had a run of good weeks at Sinclair Group, the kind of weeks where the accumulated work of months suddenly becomes visible in results, and she came to Thursday mornings with slightly less of the bone-deep tiredness that had been her baseline since he'd met her. They were not loud about what they were. Neither of them had the instinct for public declaration. It wasn't reticence exactly, more the preference of two people who had learned that things said privately, proved privately, mattered more than announcements. Their children knew. Eleanor, Victoria's mother, had figured it out with the efficiency of a woman who had been watching her daughter closely for years and recognized the difference in her. James Harlow texted Ethan. I heard a rumor, and Ethan replied. Mind your business, James and James replied. I'm taking credit for this until I die, which was aggravating and also not entirely unfair. What they built in those weeks was unglamorous and specific. He helped her when her car needed servicing and the scheduling was impossible. Drove her to a board meeting, picked her up, no comment, no ceremony. She reviewed a contract dispute he was navigating with a subcontractor and caught a clause he'd missed, which he acknowledged directly and used, which she appreciated more than if he'd made a bigger deal of it. When Marcus had a bad week, a conflict at school that escalated in the way first-grade conflicts did, sudden and disproportionate and leaving residue. She called in the evening and talked to Marcus herself for 12 minutes about a time she'd had a similar problem at his age, which was either true or a very good story, and Marcus came away from it calmer. When Lily had a cold that kept her home for 3 days, and Victoria was in the middle of a critical project phase, Ethan reorganized 2 mornings to cover the daycare gap without being asked, showing up with Marcus, who treated Lily's enforced rest like a research opportunity and read to her from his dinosaur encyclopedia until she fell asleep. None of it was perfect. Ethan had a week in late June where the Harmon Street project hit a structural snag that required him to be on site from 6 in the morning until after dark 3 days in a row, which left him running on fumes by Thursday, and not much good to anyone. Victoria could feel the distraction on him and read it correctly, not as withdrawal but as a man stretched to his limit, and let the Thursday morning be quieter than usual, carried the conversation without making it feel carried, asked the right question about the project that let him talk through the problem and find the solution in the talking, which was something she was good at that he hadn't expected. The footing on the northwest corner is giving us issues because the soil composition report had an error, he said, leaning on his elbows. The correction is manageable, but the timeline hit is about 11 days and the client is going to push back. Who's the client? Sayers Development. Owen Sayers personally. He's particular about timelines. I know Owen Sayers, she said. Not well, but I know his style. Immovable? Loud, she corrected. He's loud about things. He's not actually immovable. He wants to feel heard before he adjusts. She paused. Don't lead with the technical explanation. Lead with what you're doing to solve it, and specifically what it costs you, not just him. He responds to people who have skin in the game. Ethan looked at her. That's good. It's observation, she said. I've sat across from men like Owen Sayers in a lot of rooms. Did it work? Mostly. She finished her cortado. I'll tell you the one time it didn't if you want a cautionary tale. Next Thursday, he said. Next Thursday, she agreed. The Owen Sayers meeting went the way she'd predicted. Ethan led with accountability and solutions, acknowledged the timeline hit directly without hedging, explained what Carter Construction was absorbing to minimize the impact, and Sayers, who had come in loud, went out of the meeting grumbling but agreeable. Ethan texted Victoria afterward. "You were right about Sayers," she replied. "I'm frequently right. You're getting better at recognizing it." It was the kind of exchange that would have seemed small from the outside and was not small at all because it was the language of two people who had started to know each other in the specific way that mattered. Not the general shape of each other, but the actual interior, the reflexes and habits and soft spots and capabilities. The kind of knowing that takes time and attention and can't be shortcut. He was thinking about none of this on the Tuesday afternoon in mid-July, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He was in his site trailer on Harmon Street reviewing the revised pour schedule, and he almost let it go to voicemail. He picked it up on the fourth ring. "Carter?" he said. "Ethan Carter?" The voice was male, professionally smooth, with a calibrated warmth that was the vocal equivalent of an expensive suit. "This is Daniel Reeve. I'm not sure if Victoria has mentioned me." Ethan set down his pen. The name was not in his phone because Victoria had not given him the name, but he knew immediately, from the specific quality of the silence before the call and the careful deliberateness with which the man said, "I'm not sure if Victoria has mentioned me," that he knew exactly who this was. "She hasn't," Ethan said. A slight pause. "I see. Well, I recently got back into the city. I was hoping to reconnect with Victoria and with Lily." Another pause, calculated. "I understand you and Victoria are close." "We are," Ethan said. "Right." The warmth in his voice cooled by a degree, exactly 1 degree, controlled. "I thought it would be courteous to reach out to you directly, man to man." Ethan looked at the revised pour schedule on his desk. He picked up his pen and drew a small, precise line in the margin, the way he did when he was thinking. "What do you want, Mr. Reeve?" "I'd like to have a conversation. About the situation. About Lily." "The situation," Ethan repeated. "I know how that sounds." "I think you know exactly how it sounds," Ethan said. His voice was even. Not cold, not hostile. Just clear, the way he stated facts that weren't up for discussion. "I'd suggest you call Victoria." "I've tried. She hasn't responded." "Then that's her answer." A longer pause. "I'm her father," Daniel Reeves said, and the warmth was gone now, replaced by something that was trying to be authoritative and landing closer to defensive. "Lily's father. That's not something that changes because I'm not going to have this conversation with you," Ethan said. "Call Victoria. If she decides to respond, that's her decision. That's where this ends from my side." He hung up. He sat in the site trailer with the phone in his hand for a moment, looking at the pour schedule. Then he called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. "I'm in a meeting in 10 minutes. Daniel Reeve called me," he said. The silence on her end lasted approximately 3 seconds, which for Victoria was a very long silence. "He called you." "Direct to my cell. He said he'd tried reaching you." "I know," she said. Her voice had shifted, still controlled but with a tension underneath it that he recognized as the particular register of something that had been expected and had arrived anyway and was no easier for the expectation. "I've had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I thought it was a vendor issue." "It's not a vendor issue." "No." A breath. "Ethan, you don't have to explain anything to me right now," he said. "You have a meeting in 10 minutes, but I wanted you to know before you walked in there." Another silence. "Thank you," she said, and it was the quiet thank you, the one that meant more than the word. "I'll call you tonight." "I'll be home after 7, he said. "Marcus has swimming." "Okay." A pause. "Are you—" "I'm fine," he said. "Go to your meeting." She went to her meeting. He went back to the pour schedule, but the line he'd drawn in the margin stayed there, small and precise, and he looked at it for a moment before turning the page. Daniel Reeve was 34 years old and had the kind of background that looked better from a distance than it did up close. A family with money, an education at institutions that opened doors, a career in finance that had produced the specific variety of success that came more from positioning than effort. Victoria had met him when Sinclair Group was 2 years old, and she was 24 and working 18-hour days, and he had been charming and certain and had seemed, for a period she no longer let herself be sentimental about, like a person who was choosing her specifically. He hadn't been. He'd been choosing the version of her that was useful to his life, which was a distinction she'd understood only after it was too late to matter. He'd left when Lily was 8 months old, not dramatically. No argument, no single moment of rupture. Just the slow withdrawal of someone who had discovered that the reality of a child was different from the idea of one, and had decided with the clean self-interest of a person who had never been required to choose anyone but himself, that this particular reality was not what he'd signed up for. He'd moved to London for work. He'd sent birthday cards the first 2 years, then not. Victoria had never told Lily that her father had left because he hadn't wanted to stay. She'd said he lived far away, and that some people weren't good at being close, and that none of it was Lily's fault, which was everything true she could say to a child that age without giving her something she didn't have the tools to carry. Lily had stopped asking about him around her 4th birthday, which had been its own kind of grief. Not the asking, but the stopping. She told Ethan all of this on the phone at 7:45, Marcus presumably in bed, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone recounting something they have processed until the acute pain is gone and what's left is the dull, familiar ache of it. "Why is he back now?" Ethan asked. "Because I'm visible now," she said. "Sinclair Group's Q2 numbers were in a trade publication last month. We've had press coverage. He knows what the company is worth." A pause. "He also knows, or has found out, that I'm not alone anymore. I think that's relevant to him in a way I'm still working out." "He's testing the situation," Ethan said. "Yes." Her voice was careful. "He called me this afternoon after you told me. He used the word reconnect several times. He mentioned Lily." She stopped. "He mentioned being her father in a way that was meant to be the final argument, the thing I couldn't counter." "What did you say?" "I said I would think about it," she said, "which is not what I wanted to say, but I have a lawyer I need to talk to before I say the thing I wanted to say." "What did you want to say?" A pause. "Several things that would have felt good and been legally inadvisable." Despite everything, he almost laughed. "Okay," he said, "talk to your lawyer." "I will." A longer pause. "Ethan, he's going to want to meet you, or not meet you, he's going to want to assess you. He already called you, which means he's trying to understand the board before he makes his move." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the exhaustion under it. "I want you to know that you don't have to be part of this. This is my problem. It was my problem before you and Victoria," he said. "What?" "Stop," he said. Not harshly, just clearly. "This isn't your problem that I'm adjacent to. This is something that's happening to people I care about. Those are different things." The silence this time was different. Not the tension silence, but the absorbing silence, the kind that happened when someone said something that needed a moment to settle. "You're going to make this very hard to manage rationally," she said finally. "Probably," he said. "I prefer to manage things rationally." "I know," he said. "Talk to your lawyer. Then we'll figure out what comes next." She talked to her lawyer. The lawyer's assessment, delivered the following morning, was that Daniel Reeve had no current legal standing regarding Lily. He had never formalized paternity rights, had made no consistent financial contribution, and had not been present in Lily's life in any documented, meaningful way for over 4 years. His ability to insert himself was limited. His ability to make Victoria's life difficult through other means, social, financial, emotional, was less limited and needed to be handled with care. Victoria relayed this to Ethan on Thursday morning with the brisk efficiency of someone reporting a board decision, but her hands around the cortado were tighter than usual, stem grip, and he noted it without comment. "He wants to meet," she said. "He suggested lunch. He was very civilized about it, which is somehow worse than if he'd been hostile." "It's a performance," Ethan said. "The civility. I know." She looked at her cup. "I'm going to meet him. I'd rather know what I'm dealing with than not know." She looked up. My mother is keeping Lily. Good, he said. He'll want to know about you, she said. He'll have done research. He'll know about Carter Construction, the Harmon Street project, all of it. She paused. He's going to try to reframe himself as the better option. Not to me, he knows better. But in terms of Lily, he's going to try to suggest that his involvement would be better for her than... She stopped. Than me, Ethan said. Than the current situation, she said carefully. He looked at her. Do you believe that? No, she said without hesitation. Not for a second. Then that's all that matters, he said. What he argues doesn't change what's true. She held his gaze for a moment. You're very calm about this. I'm not particularly calm, he said honestly, but getting loud about it doesn't help you. She reached across the small table and covered his hand with hers. Not briefly this time, not the punctuation of the park bench, but deliberately, her hand resting on his with full intention. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The lunch between Victoria and Daniel Reeve happened on a Thursday. Not their Thursday, a different one. A Thursday in late July when Ethan was on the Harmon Street site and kept his phone in his pocket and checked it less than he wanted to and more than he should have. She texted him at 2:17, done, heading back to the office. Call you at 6. He called at 5:58. She picked up immediately. He was exactly what I expected, she said, which somehow still managed to be exhausting. She sounded tired. Not the bone tired of overwork, but the particular depletion of having been in a room with someone who required constant vigilance. He was charming. He was apologetic in the specific way that stops just short of an actual apology. He said he'd grown. He said London had given him perspective. He said he wanted to be present in Lily's life going forward. What did you say? I said that any involvement with Lily would be on her terms, not his. I said she was 5 years old and she was fine, and I would not disrupt that for his schedule or his conscience. A pause. He brought up you. I figured he would. He was subtle about it. He said he just wanted to understand Lily's environment. He asked how long you'd been in the picture. He asked whether things were serious. She paused. I told him that was not his concern. He pushed slightly. I told him again. Did he back off? He recalibrated, she said, which with Daniel means he moved the argument sideways rather than dropping it. He said he thought Lily should have a relationship with her actual father before she got attached. The pause after attached was a full breath. He meant you. Ethan stood in the parking lot of the Harmon Street site, the late afternoon sun hot on his back, and felt something move through him that was neither anger nor fear exactly, but was in the neighborhood of both. He breathed it out. What did you say? I said that attachment wasn't the problem he thought it was, and that the people Lily was attached to had been present for it, had earned it. Another pause. He didn't have a clean response to that. No, Ethan said. He wouldn't. He's going to try again, she said. I know him. Today was reconnaissance. He's deciding how much this is worth to him and in what currency. Her voice was steady, but the exhaustion in it was real. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this. I'm not in the middle of it, he said. I'm on your side of it. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. I'm still working on accepting help without apologizing for needing it. I know, he said. You're getting better at it. The move Daniel Reeve made was not the one Ethan expected. He'd expected legal posturing, or a campaign through mutual acquaintances, or the particular social pressure of someone who knew people. What he got instead was a phone call, on a Saturday morning in August when Ethan was at Victoria's apartment, helping Marcus and Lily assemble a model of the solar system that had turned out to have 37 more pieces than the box suggested. Victoria's phone rang, and she looked at the screen, and the look on her face was enough. She took the call in the kitchen, voice low. Ethan kept sorting Saturn's rings with Marcus and Lily and kept his hands busy and his attention split. She was back in 8 minutes. She stood at the kitchen doorway with her phone in her hand and looked at Ethan with an expression that was composed and absolutely furious in the way that real fury was quiet. He's been talking to Robert Calloway, she said. Robert Calloway was the Sinclair Group shareholder who had been pushing the timeline issue on Harmon Street. Ethan had known the name. He hadn't known the connection. They know each other, Victoria said. Business school. Reeve is... Apparently he's been suggesting to Calloway that the company's current trajectory involves personal decisions that may affect stability. She stopped. He's trying to create pressure from inside my own board. The room was quiet, except for Marcus asking Lily which ring went where. Ethan stood up from the coffee table slowly and came to the kitchen doorway. He looked at Victoria carefully. He's using the company, Ethan said. He's trying to, she said. It won't work. Calloway is an annoyance, not a threat. He doesn't have the votes to do anything real. She pressed her lips together. But it's a message. It's Reeve telling me he has options, that he can make things complicated if I don't. She stopped. If you don't let him back in, Ethan said. She looked at him. Yes. Something settled in Ethan. Not anger, not protectiveness, not any of the reactive things. Something quieter and more durable. He had built things in bad weather. He had held timelines when conditions pushed against him. He understood that some pressures were designed to make you move before you'd thought it through, and that the answer to those pressures was not to respond but to hold. Let me call Owen Sayers, he said. She blinked. What? Sayers Development has relationships with Calloway's fund. I know this because I looked at the Harmon Street project financing structure when I was putting together the proposal. He met her eyes. Owen Sayers does not like people who apply pressure sideways. He thinks it's bad form. I know this because I've now had 2 meetings with the man. He paused. I'm not going to threaten anyone. I'm going to have a conversation with Owen Sayers about the Harmon Street project's strong current trajectory and mention that some shareholder noise has been unhelpful, and let him draw his own conclusions about who's worth backing. Victoria stared at him. That's quite good. I learned from someone who handles rooms well, he said. She looked at him for a long moment with something in her expression that was complicated and warm and not fully expressible. Then she looked past him at the living room, where Marcus and Lily had apparently resolved the ring dispute and were now debating the size of Jupiter with the focused intensity of children who had accepted this project as a serious undertaking. Dad, Marcus called, without looking up. Lily says Jupiter is bigger than all the other planets combined. Is that true? Mostly true, Ethan called back. Jupiter is very large. See, Lily said to Marcus with profound satisfaction. Victoria looked at this scene, the solar system in pieces on her living room floor, the 2 children cross-legged and arguing facts, the afternoon light on the apartment she'd built into a home by herself, and then she looked at Ethan, this man in her kitchen doorway who had just offered to call Owen Sayers, not because she'd asked, but because it was the useful thing, and he was someone who did the useful thing without making it a statement. He called you to intimidate you, she said. Daniel, when he called you the first time. I know, Ethan said. It didn't work. No, he said simply. She nodded. Once, the decision nod. I'm going to handle Reeve directly, she said. I'm going to be very clear about what his options actually are, which are limited, and then I'm going to stop giving him energy. That's probably right, Ethan said. I just needed... She stopped, looked slightly away. I needed a minute where I could be angry about it with someone who wasn't going to tell me it was going to be fine. It probably will be fine, he said. Eventually, that's different from telling you right now that it's fine. Yes, she said. It is different. She looked back at him. Thank you. Stop thanking me, he said. I'm here. That's the job. Something in her face cracked open slightly, just at the edges, just enough. She reached up and put her hand briefly against his jaw, warm and deliberate, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent years being capable and alone and was learning slowly and not without difficulty what it felt like when you didn't have to be both at the same time. Saturn's rings, Marcus announced from the living room, go in this order. I know because I checked the book. He checked the book, Lily confirmed, as though this settled all possible debate. Victoria dropped her hand. She turned toward the living room. He followed her, and they went back to the solar system on the floor, and Ethan sat beside Marcus and passed him the next ring, and Lily explained to Victoria why Pluto deserved better than it got, which it did, and the afternoon held them all the way it sometimes did, imperfectly and specifically and exactly enough. The conversation with Daniel Reeve that Victoria had later that week was conducted by phone, lasted 11 minutes, and was not something she described to Ethan in detail. What she told him afterward was this: she'd been clear, she'd been final, and she'd been prepared for every response he had. He had tried 4 different angles. She had closed each one. At the end, he had been quiet for a moment and then said, with the exhausted civility of someone who has run out of moves, that he supposed they'd talk again sometime. "I said we might," Victoria told Ethan, "for Lily's sake, if Lily ever wanted that, on Lily's timeline, not his." "And he accepted that?" "He didn't have better options," she said, "and I think somewhere under all of it, he knew that." Ethan nodded. He didn't say good, or that's that, or anything that would have made it neater than it was, because it wasn't neat. It was a door that wasn't locked but was closed, and it would stay closed until and unless a 5-year-old girl decided she wanted to open it on her own terms. And that was complicated and real, and not something that got tied up. "Are you okay?" he asked. She thought about it, actually thought, rather than the reflexive fine. "I'm tired," she said, "and I'm glad it's done for now. And She paused. "I'm glad you were here for it. Even when I was handling it, I knew you were here. That mattered more than it probably should have." "It should have mattered," he said. "That's what it's supposed to feel like." She looked at him. "Is it?" she said quietly. "I'd forgotten." "Yeah," he said. "It is." She leaned into him then, not dramatically. Just the simple forward lean of someone who was tired and had decided finally and without apology to let that be visible. He put his arm around her and she stayed there for a moment. Just that. Just the weight of it. And outside the city moved through August with its usual indifference, and the Harmon Street project rose one more floor, and somewhere across town Daniel Reeves sat with his limited options and his too-late perspective. And in this apartment, on this evening, 2 people sat together in the specific quiet of something that had been tested and had held. August gave way to September the way it always did in the city. Not with any single change, but with a gradual shift in the quality of the light. Something cooler at the edges of the afternoon, the air losing its heavy insistence and becoming something easier to breathe. The Harmon Street project crossed the halfway mark on a Thursday, which Ethan marked by buying coffee for every person on site and standing on the 7th floor looking out at the city with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a thing they built become real. Brianna texted him a photo from street level, the building rising above the construction hoarding, Carter construction signage visible, with the caption, "Look what we made." He sent it to Victoria without comment. She replied 40 minutes later, clearly between meetings. "That's yours. You should be proud." Then, a second text. "I'm proud of it, and it's not even mine." He looked at that second text for longer than the first. The Callaway situation had resolved with less drama than it deserved. Ethan's conversation with Owen Sayers, conducted over the phone, professional, carefully without explicit accusation, had produced the result he'd anticipated. Sayers, who had his own complicated history with Robert Callaway's fund and did not appreciate sideways pressure applied to projects he considered well-managed, had apparently made a call. Callaway had gone quiet. He hadn't disappeared from Victoria's board structure, but his particular brand of noise had stopped, which was sufficient. Victoria hadn't made a big thing of it. She'd said, "The Callaway issue seems to have resolved." He'd said, "Good." That was the whole exchange, which was exactly the right length for it. What neither of them said, but both understood, was that something had been established in the months since July that went beyond the ordinary accumulation of good days. They had been tested, not in any dramatic singular way, but in the accumulation of smaller pressures that revealed character more reliably than any single crisis did. How someone behaved when they were tired. How someone responded when a problem wasn't theirs but was affecting someone they cared about. Whether the presence they offered was consistent or conditional. These were the real tests, unglamorous and specific, and they had passed them imperfectly and honestly, which was the only way that mattered. There were still friction points. Victoria's first instinct under pressure remained to close inward, to handle things alone, to present the resolved version rather than the struggling version. Ethan caught it happening sometimes, a tightness in her voice on a Thursday morning that she hadn't quite finished smoothing over, a text that said, fine in the way that meant not entirely fine. And he'd learned how to respond to each version correctly, not to push, not to perform concern, just to stay present and let her find her own way to the thing she actually wanted to say. He had his own failures in this. He was, by habit and history, better at solving things than sitting with them. His inclination when Victoria was struggling was to identify the problem in its most efficient solution, which was useful approximately 60% of the time and counterproductive the other 40%, when what she needed was not a solution but a person who would stay in the difficulty with her without trying to rush them both out of it. He was working on it. She told him once, with the direct honesty that was her most consistent quality, "You fix things. I know that's what you do, but sometimes I just need you to be here while I figure it out myself." He'd heard that, and he'd tried. He hadn't always succeeded, but he'd kept trying, which she acknowledged, and the acknowledgement mattered. Marcus, for his part, had adapted to the new shape of things with the pragmatic ease of a child who had decided the situation was good and therefore accepted it. He asked about Victoria and Lily with the straightforward frequency of someone inquiring about established facts of his life. Are we seeing them Saturday? Is Lily coming to my game? Can Victoria come to the school thing? And treated any yes as expected and any not this time as manageable. He had stopped referring to Victoria as your friend sometime in September and started using her name directly, which was a small change that Ethan noticed and didn't mention. Lily's adjustment was less linear. She was 5, and then she was turning 6, and the emotional terrain of that age was genuinely complicated. She could be entirely comfortable with Ethan one afternoon and slightly wary the next, not for any clear reason, just the variability of a small person working through feelings she didn't yet have full vocabulary for. He didn't take the wary days personally. He'd learned this from Marcus, who at 3 had gone through a period of being unreasonably hostile to the concept of breakfast and had emerged from it with no lasting damage to either of them. Children had weather. You didn't argue with weather. The thing with Lily happened on a Sunday in late September. It was an ordinary Sunday. The 4 of them at Victoria's apartment, the kind of loose, unstructured afternoon that had become its own routine. Marcus was on the living room floor with a new building kit, the kind with approximately 900 pieces that came with instructions written for someone with an engineering degree. Lily was supposed to be helping, but had largely taken on the role of creative director, suggesting modifications that Marcus received with the diplomatic patience of someone who had decided Lily's input was welcome, but not necessarily binding. Victoria was on the couch with her laptop, allegedly resting but actually reviewing a document, which was the Victoria Sinclair version of rest. Ethan was in the kitchen cleaning up the lunch plates, which was a thing he did without discussion whenever he was at her apartment, because dishes sitting in the sink bothered him in the specific way of someone who had spent years keeping a household functional alone and developed standards accordingly. He heard the knock from the hallway. Small, knuckles on the kitchen door frame. He turned around. Lily was standing there in her socks, Commander Bun under one arm, looking at him with the serious assessment she got when she was working up to something. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" She came into the kitchen and climbed onto the step stool she'd apparently placed there at some point specifically for kitchen conversations. He noticed it was positioned with intention and looked at him at near eye level. "I have to ask you something," she said. "Okay," he said, and set down the dish towel. She was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts the way she did, with the careful precision of her mother in miniature. "At my school," she said, "Emma has a dad who lives at her house, and Jalen has a dad who lives somewhere else but comes on weekends, and Sophie doesn't have a dad at all." She paused. "My dad lives far away." "I know," he said carefully. "He called Mom," she said. Ethan kept his face still. "I know. Mom said he wanted to say hello." She looked at Commander Bun for a moment. "I didn't want to say hello." He waited. He didn't fill the silence because the silence wasn't his to fill. "Is that bad?" she asked, looking back up at him. That I didn't want to? No, he said. That's not bad at all. You get to decide who you want to talk to. She absorbed this. Mom cried after, she said quietly. She thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. He breathed slowly. Sometimes things are complicated even when you handle them right, he said. That's not your fault. I know. She was quiet again. Then, you're not going to go far away. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the careful weight of a child who had thought about it and arrived at a conclusion she was presenting for confirmation. No, he said. I'm not. She looked at him steadily. You said before you weren't planning on going anywhere. That's different from saying you're not going. He looked at this child, almost 6 years old, dark-haired, entirely too perceptive for anyone's comfort, and felt the specific weight of being held to his exact words by someone who had been paying very close attention to every one of them. You're right, he said. It is different. He thought about it. I'm not going anywhere, Lily. I want to be here. I plan to be here. He paused. I can't promise you that nothing in life ever changes because that would be a lie, and you'd figure that out and then you couldn't trust me. But I can promise you that I will always tell you the truth. And the truth right now is that I want to be here, and I'm going to work hard to stay. She considered him for a very long moment. Commander Bunn received a brief squeeze. Then she nodded, once, with the finality of someone closing a deal. Okay, she said. She climbed off the step stool, tucked Commander Bunn more securely under her arm, and went back to the living room where Marcus had apparently made an executive decision about the building kit that she immediately began auditing. Ethan stood in the kitchen for a moment with his hands on the edge of the sink and breathed. He heard Victoria's voice from the couch. Marcus, let her look at the instructions. And Marcus's, I did look at the instructions. And Lily's, with the authority of someone who has just concluded an important piece of business and returned fully to the matter at hand, you looked at them wrong. He smiled at the kitchen wall. Then he picked up the dish towel and finished the plates. Later that night, after both kids were asleep, Marcus in the guest room that had quietly become Marcus's room, with a dinosaur encyclopedia on the nightstand and a drawing of Gerald the excavator taped to the wall, which had happened so gradually that no one had made a moment of it, Victoria told him about the conversation. Not all of it. Just, Lily talked to me tonight. She said she asked you something. She did? He said. She said you answered right. He looked at her. High standard. For her, yes. Victoria was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd been forgetting to drink for 20 minutes, and she looked at him with the expression that still occasionally caught him off guard, open in the way she only was when her guard had come down fully, which happened more now than it used to, which was its own kind of thing. She doesn't give that lightly. I know, he said. Neither do I, she said. He looked at her across the kitchen table, this woman who held her wine glass by the stem and sat in parking garages to shift gears and had built a company and raised a child and learned, at some cost, to be careful with both. This woman who had told him she was in love with him in her own living room on a Wednesday night with the terrified honesty of someone who'd run out of reasons not to say it, who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, to let help be help instead of debt. I know that too, he said. She reached across the table. He took her hand. They sat in the kitchen with the sleeping children down the hall and the city outside and the tea going cold, and it was ordinary in the way that the best things were. Not cinematic, not resolved into perfect clarity, just real and specific and present. October brought the kind of weather the city did well, cool and bright, the trees doing their annual brief spectacular thing before dropping everything, which Marcus considered one of the more dramatic natural events of the year and had opinions about. The Harmon Street project hit its third-quarter milestone ahead of the revised schedule, which Ethan reported to Victoria's development team in a meeting that was professional and efficient and ended with her project manager shaking his hand and saying Carter Construction had been the best call they'd made on the development. He thanked him without making a thing of it and sent Brianna a text on the way to his truck. Good meeting. She replied, I know. I watched through the glass. He replied, You're not subtle, Brianna. She replied, I'm absolutely not. Victoria's Q3 results came in during the second week of October and were the strongest in Sinclair Group's history. She called him from her office at 6:15 on a Friday evening after the team celebration had wound down, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who is not quite ready to put a feeling into words but needs to say it to someone. "We hit every target," she said, "and 2 of the stretch goals." "I know," he said. "Brianna follows trade publications." "Of course she does." A pause. It's everything I built toward for a long time. When I was in that rented office with 6 employees and $11,000, and I thought—" She stopped. "You thought this was the version," he said. "The one you were working toward." "Yes." Her voice was quiet. "And it is. It's exactly that." Another pause. "I just wanted to tell someone who knew the whole distance." He understood that. The particular loneliness of achievement when you've traveled a long road largely alone. The way success in a room full of colleagues, even good ones, still had a hollow quality if there was no one there who knew what the starting point looked like. "I know the whole distance," he said. "You did it, Victoria. All of it." She was quiet for a moment. "Not all of it," she said. "Not the last part." He didn't argue with that. "Go home," he said. "We'll celebrate properly Saturday." Define properly. Marcus has strong opinions about celebration food. Brace yourself for a negotiation about pizza. She laughed. Real, unguarded, the full version. "Tell him my diner does a better pizza than wherever he's thinking. He will dispute that vigorously." "Good," she said. "I look forward to it." Saturday was loud and imperfect and good. The pizza debate was resolved by ordering from both places and conducting what Lily called a tournament, which Marcus accepted as a legitimate framework and which produced a winner that both children disputed on different grounds. Eleanor came and sat at the kitchen table and watched Ethan make coffee with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time to see a particular thing and was now seeing it and was keeping most of her feelings about that to herself, as was her custom. She cornered him briefly while Victoria was in the living room refereeing the post-tournament analysis. "You're good for her," Eleanor said. Not warmly, exactly. More like a fact being acknowledged, which was more valuable than warmth. "I hope so," he said. "You are," Eleanor said. "She laughs differently." She picked up her coffee cup and went back to the living room with the efficiency of someone who had said the thing and considered it handled. He stood in the kitchen and felt the particular weight of those 3 words, "She laughs differently," and understood that Eleanor was telling him something that mattered and that she would not say again. The drawing happened on a Sunday in November. It was raining, which was the city's November default, and the 4 of them had been inside all afternoon. The building kit had been retired and replaced by an art project of Lily's devising, which Marcus had gotten pulled into with the resigned good nature of a 7-year-old who had learned that Lily's projects were usually more interesting than they initially appeared. The project had scattered across the coffee table and the floor around it: paper, crayons, the small watercolor set Lily had gotten for her birthday, markers in 11 colors. Marcus was drawing something that had started as a rocket ship and evolved into a rocket ship that was also somehow a dinosaur, which he was committed to. Lily was working on something with focused intensity, bent low over the paper, the crayon moving with the deliberateness of someone executing a plan. Victoria was on the couch with a book she was actually reading, which was different from the laptop rest. Ethan was on the floor with his back against the couch, close enough that her knee was near his shoulder, reading a project report he'd brought in a folder and kept telling himself he'd put away in a few minutes. He didn't notice Lily finish. He noticed that she got up and came to stand in front of him with the sheet of paper held against her chest, backwards, so he couldn't see it yet. "I made something," she said. "Yeah?" He closed the folder. "It's for everyone," she said, "but I want you to see it first." He looked at Victoria, who had looked up from her book. Victoria shook her head slightly. She hadn't known either. Lily handed him the paper. It was a house, the kind children drew, square with a triangular roof and 4 windows and a door in the middle. Carefully drawn, for Lily, the lines more deliberate than her usual work. In front of the house were 4 figures, rendered in crayon with the loving imprecision of a 6-year-old's hand. One tall, in brown. Ethan, he understood, from the hard hat she'd added because she always drew him with a hard hat. One tall in blue, dark hair. Victoria. One small in green, Marcus, with something that was probably meant to be a dinosaur book under one arm. One small in yellow. Lily herself, in the yellow raincoat because yellow was easier to see if you got lost. They were standing in front of the house in a line, the four figures, and they were holding hands, small crayon lines connecting them, Lily to Victoria, Victoria to Ethan, Ethan to Marcus. A chain, a complete one. Above the house, in Lily's careful 6-year-old printing, she had written U.S., just that, U.S. He sat on the floor with the drawing in his hands and felt something move through him that he was not going to be able to manage cleanly, which he had a moment to recognize before Lily said, with the practical candor of someone reporting a fact, "I put you next to Mom because that's where you go." He looked up at her. He looked at Victoria, who had taken the drawing when he held it up, and whose face was doing the thing it did when she was holding something in that was pressing hard from the inside. The rigid, careful stillness, the eyes that were not going to do anything embarrassing, not in front of the children probably, but were not managing it easily. "Lily," Victoria said, and her voice was almost steady. "It's us," Lily said simply. "That's what we are." Marcus looked up from the rocket dinosaur. He looked at the drawing. He looked at Ethan. He nodded with the solemn gravity of a 7-year-old who had been waiting for this to become officially stated. "Yeah," he said. "That's what we are." Ethan put his arm around Marcus and pulled him against his side. He reached up with his other hand and Victoria took it, her grip firm and immediate. Lily climbed onto the couch beside her mother and leaned into her, and for a moment they were just there, all four of them, imperfectly arranged, holding on. "I'm hanging this on the refrigerator," Lily announced. "Yes," Victoria said. Her voice was not quite steady. "We are." The drawing went on the refrigerator that afternoon, next to Lily's other drawings and Marcus's permission slip for the class trip, and a takeout menu that had been there since August, and a photograph Eleanor had given Victoria of the museum trip in May. All four of them in front of the dinosaur exhibit, Marcus mid-explanation about something, Lily's hand in Ethan's, Victoria caught in the moment of laughing at something he'd said. An ordinary photograph of an ordinary day that had been extraordinary in the specific way that ordinary days sometimes were. The thing about the drawing, Ethan thought afterward, was not that it resolved anything or announced anything or tied anything up. There was still a building project to finish and a company to run and homework arguments and bad mornings and the particular ongoing difficulty of two imperfect adults trying to build something real while also raising children who deserved to be raised well. Victoria still had her instinct to close inward when things got hard, and Ethan still had his instinct to solve things that needed sitting with. And they would both keep working on these things with the effort of people who understood that effort was the actual commitment, not the feeling. There was still a man in London who had made bad choices and would have to live with them for the rest of his life, and a little girl who might someday want answers that no one could make simple, and a 7-year-old who had learned to be careful about the world and would carry that carefulness for a long time. None of that disappeared because of a crayon drawing on a rainy Sunday in November, but the drawing was true. That was the thing. US was what they were, in the specific and unglamorous and daily way that mattered. The Thursday mornings and the park Saturdays and the Wednesday evenings and the museum trips and the refrigerator drawings and the pizza tournaments and Eleanor's coffee and Brianna's surveillance through glass doors and James Harlow, who would be insufferable about this for the rest of his natural life, and whom Ethan had already decided he would simply have to endure. US was what they had built. Not quickly, not easily, not without cost, not without the specific friction of two people who had learned the hard way to be careful and had to relearn, slowly and together, what it felt like when being careful and being open were not opposites. The Harmon Street building was completed in the 3rd week of December, which was 11 days ahead of the final revised schedule and a full 3 weeks ahead of the original. Ethan stood on the finished ground floor on the afternoon of the final inspection, which he passed without comment needing to be made, and looked up through the atrium at 12 floors of something that had not existed a year ago, and now did, which was always the thing, the part that didn't get less meaningful with repetition. Victoria came by in the late afternoon, after the inspection team had gone, with Lily and Marcus and 2 thermoses of coffee, because it was December and cold and she was a practical person. They stood in the atrium of the finished building, the 4 of them, their voices echoing slightly in the empty space. Marcus looked up at the full height of it and said, "Gerald helped with this." "Gerald contributed significantly," Ethan confirmed. Lily tilted her head back and looked at the ceiling 12 floors up and said, "It's very tall." "That was the plan," Victoria said. "What goes in it?" Lily asked. "Offices," Ethan said. "Eventually." Lily considered this. "That's okay," she decided. "It's still nice." Victoria handed Ethan the thermos. Their hands touched in the exchange and stayed that way for a moment, easy and warm, the contact of people who had stopped noticing they were reaching for each other because it had become the natural thing. Marcus was already explaining the structural significance of the ground floor to Lily, who was listening with the focused interest she gave to things Marcus was genuinely passionate about, which was its own small thing to watch. "You built a good building," Victoria said. "We built a good building," he said. "Your development team gave me something worth building." She looked at him. The December light came through the atrium glass and made everything pale and clean. "I meant what I said in October," she said, "when I called you from the office." "Which part?" "The part about knowing the whole distance." She held his gaze. "You're the only person I've ever had who knows the whole distance." He looked at her, this woman who had walked every step of a hard road before he'd come into it, and who had let him in carefully and specifically and with the full understanding of what she was allowing, which made it more, not less. "I know," he said. "That's not something I take lightly." "I know you don't," she said. "That's why I told you." Marcus tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Dad, Lily wants to know if you can build us a house." Ethan looked at Victoria. Her expression was something between startled and trying not to smile, and something else that she was letting him see without hiding it. "We'll talk about it," Ethan told Marcus. "That's what adults say when they mean yes," Lily informed Marcus with the authority of long study. "Sometimes," Ethan said. "Usually," Lily said. Victoria was smiling now, fully, the real one, the one that changed her face. He looked at her looking at their children, in the practical sense that children belong to the people who show up for them, and felt the specific gratitude of someone who has been given something they know the value of because they knew the absence of it. He was not a man given to dramatic statements or tidy conclusions. He knew too much about what it took to build things to believe that anything worth having arrived complete. What they had was a foundation, strong, tested, real, and what they would build on it would take time and weather and the ongoing daily work of 2 people choosing, over and over, to stay. But the foundation was solid. He knew foundations. He put his arm around Victoria's shoulders, and she leaned into him, easy and natural, the way she'd learned to lean without apology. And they watched their children's voices echo through the atrium of a building that hadn't existed a year ago. And the December light came through the glass, and outside the city moved through its ordinary December afternoon, with the indifference cities have to particular moments in particular lives. Inside, the moment was not ordinary at all. Inside, it was exactly what Lily had written in 6-year-old printing above her crayon house on a rainy Sunday in November, the truest and simplest and most complete thing anyone had said about any of it. U.S. That was what they were. That was what they had built. Not from ease or luck or the clean falling into place that made for better stories, but from Thursday mornings and honest conversations and the specific courage of 2 people who had been careful for good reasons and had chosen, finally, to be brave for better ones. Some things don't find you when you're ready. They find you when you've gotten honest enough to recognize them and strong enough to hold on. That was the whole of it. That was enough.